32 years. I had lived as a ghost lingering after that fateful day at Hyde Park in 1992. But today, my dead son suddenly stepped out of the void, sitting opposite me with a genetic test result that could upend all of London.
I am Alistair Sterling. In my career as a judge, I have faced thousands of killers and the most sophisticated lies, but never has my heart trembled like this. That 99.91% figure was like a blade cutting straight into a wound that never healed, confirming that Benedict Thorne, the stranger in front of me, was indeed my only blood returned from the dead.
But this miracle was not free. Amidst choked tears, Benedict just dropped a bomb worth £165 million, a massive trust fund my father, Sir Reginald, had secretly left, and then his voice broke, full of urgency. "Father, I don't need that fortune. I just need £9.5 million right now to save my rare book company from collapse. Otherwise, I will lose everything once again. £9.5 million for a reunion. Is this the last chance for me to make amends to my late wife Eleanor, or am I personally signing my own death sentence for a spectacular $1 million scam?" Stay tuned, because the truth behind that 9991 figure is more brutal than you can imagine. London's fog didn't just hang over the Thames that morning. It clawed at the city, a thick grey shroud that tasted of salt and ancient soot. I sat in my usual corner booth at the Wolseley on Piccadilly, a grand, vaulted mausoleum of black marble and brass where the ghosts of old London came to pretend they were still relevant. For 32 years I had occupied this same seat, a retired High Court judge seeking refuge in the rhythmic clink of silver in China, trying to drown out the silence of a life that had ended on a Tuesday afternoon in 1992. I was halfway through a bitter black coffee when the air around the table shifted. It wasn't the usual frantic energy of a waiter. It was something heavier, more predatory. A man sat down across from me without a word. He didn't ask. He just occupied the space like he owned it. He wore a charcoal overcoat that looked like it cost 3 months of my pension. But his eyes were ancient. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and decided to settle there. "You're staring, Alistair," he said. His voice was a low rasp, refined yet jagged, like a blade wrapped in silk. I set my cup down with a deliberate, icy click. "I have sent men to Belmarsh for less than an uninvited intrusion, mister." "You don't recognize me," he said, ignoring the threat. He didn't lean in. He remained perfectly still, a statue of hidden intent. "But then, why would you? You've spent 3 decades looking for a ghost, and ghosts don't usually order the full English." My blood, usually as cold as a legal brief, gave a sudden, violent thrum in my temples. "I don't play games. State your business or I'll have the manager remove you." The man reached into a leather satchel and pulled out a manila folder. He slid it across the table with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "August 20th, 1992, he whispered. The words hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Hyde Park, near the Serpentine, 4:45 p.m. You turned away to check your pocket watch because Eleanor wanted to know if you were late for the opera. In those 6 seconds, the world stopped turning. The Wolseley vanished. The noise of the breakfast crowd, the smell of toasted brioche, all of it was replaced by the sudden chilling memory of a humid August heat and the deafening silence where a child's laughter had been seconds before. "Who the hell are you?" I hissed, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard the knuckles turned white. "I am the boy you lost, Alistair," he said, his gaze locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "I am Benedict Sterling. My son is dead," I spat, the words a practiced shield against the grief that had ossified in my bones. "He was taken by traffickers, or worse. I spent a decade and a fortune chasing shadows until there was nothing left but a headstone without a body." "You chased the wrong shadows," Benedict replied. He opened the folder. Inside was a Polaroid, its edges yellowed and cracked. It showed a toddler with messy, dark hair sitting on a sun-drenched step next to a golden retriever. You took this in the summer of '91. You told me to smile, but I was more interested in the ice lolly melting on my shirt. My breath hitched. I knew that photo. I had a copy in my safe, the last physical proof that my family had ever been whole. Anyone could have stolen a photograph, I growled, though my voice was losing its iron. A desperate con artist could find these details in the archives of the Daily Mail. Benedict didn't argue. Instead, he stood up slowly and unbuttoned his overcoat, then the top of his shirt. He pulled the fabric aside, exposing his left shoulder. There, etched into the pale skin, was a jagged, white star-shaped scar. The nursery at the old house, Benedict said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. I tried to climb the bookshelf to reach the music box. It fell. A shard of porcelain from the base sliced me open. Mother cried harder than I did. She played the piano to calm me down while we waited for the doctor. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. She told me that every time she played it, the stars would listen. The air left my lungs. That detail, the specific music Eleanor played that night, was never in a police report. It wasn't in the newspapers. It was a private moment between a panicked father, a bleeding child, and a woman whose music was the heartbeat of our home. God help me, I whispered, my vision blurring. Benedict. He sat back down, the defensive mask on his face cracking for a split second to reveal a raw, desperate vulnerability. I spent 25 years in a hell you can't imagine, Alistair. Sold, traded, and raised by people who viewed me as an asset, not a human being. I've been a ghost for a long time. I'm tired of being dead. The shock was a tidal wave, but the judge in me, the man who had spent a lifetime weighing evidence, was still screaming. If this is true, if you were really him, why now? Why after 32 years of silence? Benedict's expression shifted. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, hard calculation that sent a shiver down my spine. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Because the past isn't just about memories, Father. It's about a legacy. I know about the Sterling Trust. I know about the £165 million Sir Reginald left for his heir. My heart turned to lead. The money. It was always the money. My company, Thorn Antiques, is being hunted, Benedict continued, his words coming fast now, a desperate edge sharpening his tone. I've made mistakes, Alistair. I've tied up everything I have in rare manuscripts that are currently being held by creditors who don't take no for an answer. If I don't get £9.5 million by the end of the week, they won't just take the shop. They'll take... I stared at him, this man who had my wife's eyes and my father's predatory instincts. He was sterling, through and through. But was he my son, or was he a masterpiece of a fraud, designed to gut the remains of my life for a payout? You want me to sign over nearly £10 million to a stranger I met 10 minutes ago, I asked, my voice returning to its judicial chill. Benedict reached out, his hand hovering over mine, but never touching. I want you to look at that photograph, look at this scar, and tell me you're willing to lose your son a second time, because you're too afraid to believe in a miracle. Around us, the grand hall of the Wolseley hummed with the trivialities of the wealthy, oblivious to the fact that a man was either being resurrected or robbed in the corner booth. I need proof, I said, the words feeling like a betrayal of my own heart, a DNA test, an independent lab, chain of custody. Benedict nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. I've already booked the appointment. The lab is in Marylebone. We can go now. He stood up, towering over me. But Alistair, be careful what you pray for. Sometimes the things we lose are better left in the dark. As I followed him out into the swirling London fog, I realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the price of the truth was going to be far higher than £165 million. The waiting room of Gene Tech Marylebone was a sterile purgatory. It smelled of ozone, expensive floor wax, and the quiet desperation of people praying for miracles or hiding from the truth. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my hands clasped so tightly they felt like blocks of wood. Across from me, Benedict Thorne, the man who claimed to be my stolen heartbeat, stared at a spot on the wall with an intensity that could have burned a hole through the drywall. The silence was a physical wait until the door clicked open. Dr. Elizabeth Sterling walked in, clutching a digital tablet like a shield. She didn't look at Benedict. She looked at me, her eyes carrying the weight of a judge delivering a capital sentence. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice a clinical hum, "we have processed the buccal swab samples under strict chain of custody protocols. We cross-referenced your profile with the sample provided by Mr. Thorne. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird screaming to be let out. Give it to me straight, doctor. No medical jargon." She turned the tablet toward me. A single number was highlighted in a bold, violent red. 9991. "In layman's terms," she said softly, "there is near absolute certainty. The genetic markers are undeniable. Alistair, he is your son." The world didn't just tilt, it shattered. 32 years of mourning, of empty birthdays and silent Christmases, collapsed into a single agonizing second. I stood up, my legs turning to water. I looked at Benedict. No, I looked at Benedict Sterling, my boy. My little star-scared climbers. "Benedict," I choked out, the name tasting like smoke and tears. He lunged toward me, and suddenly I was holding him. He was too thin, his frame vibrating with a visceral, jagged sob. He smelled of rain and old paper, a scent that triggered a flash of Eleanor's library. I buried my face in his shoulder, weeping with a violence I hadn't felt since we buried his empty casket. "I'm sorry," I whispered into his coat. "I'm so sorry I didn't find you." "I'm here, Dad," he gasped, the word Dad hitting me with the force of a high-speed collision. "I'm finally here." An hour later, we were in the back of a black cab, cutting through the London drizzle toward my private study in Chelsea. The euphoria was still there, a golden hum in my veins, but the judge in me was starting to wake up. "There's something you need to see," Benedict said, his voice regaining that hard, professional edge as we settled into the leather armchairs of my library. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. "What is this?" I asked, eyeing the crest on the seal. It was the lion and the anchor, my father's personal signet. Sir Reginald Sterling. "It's the reason I'm still alive, and the reason I might not be by Friday," Benedict said, sliding a document across the mahogany desk. "Grandfather didn't trust the world, Alistair, especially not after I was taken. He set up the Sterling Trust in October 1988, 3 months before I vanished." I scanned the dense legal prose, my eyes widened as I hit the valuation page. £165 million, I roared, the number sounding like a fantasy. My father was a media mogul, but he never mentioned this. He told me he'd left me the house and a modest pension. "He hid it from you," Benedict said, a bitter smile touching his lips. "The documents say he wanted to provide for his heirs without enabling Alistair's self-destructive tendency toward martyrdom. He knew you'd give it all to charity or lose it in some crusade for justice." I felt a surge of old anger toward my father, a man who controlled his family even from the grave. So it sits there, gathering dust. "No," Benedict leaned forward, his hazel eyes, Eleanor's eyes burning with a sudden, terrifying urgency. "It's mine, but only when I turn 35 or, if the primary beneficiary, that's you, signs a non-judicial settlement agreement to release the funds early." I went cold. The golden hum in my veins turned to ice. "Benedict, we just walked out of a DNA lab. You're talking about a king's ransom." "I'm talking about my life," Benedict snapped, his hand slamming onto the desk, rattling the Scotch decanter. "I didn't come here to play the lottery, Alistair. I came here because Thorn sourcing and rare books is being gutted by a pack of wolves." I've tied up every penny I own in a collection of Elizabethan manuscripts that are currently being held hostage in a bonded warehouse in Southwark. He stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. The sellers backed out. They kept the deposits. I am contractually obligated to cover a shortfall of £9.5 million by the end of the week. If I don't, they don't just take the books. They liquidate me. Literally. Who are these sellers? I asked, my judicial instincts screaming. People you don't want to know, he hissed. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip bruising. I spent 15 years in a Belgrade hellhole because your father's enemies wanted a pound of flesh. I've survived traffickers, brawls, and a life of absolute nothingness. I finally built something for myself, a legacy, and now it's all turning to ash because of a timing issue. 9.5 million, I whispered. Benedict, I don't have that in liquid cash. But you have the power to sign the agreement, he pleaded, his voice cracking, shifting from the hardened businessman to the wounded child in a heartbeat. Dad, please, look at me. I'm your son. The DNA doesn't lie. I'm not asking for the 165 million. I'm asking for a bridge loan from my own inheritance. Sign the papers. Save me. He thrust a 52-page document toward me, the non-judicial settlement agreement. It looked like a death warrant or a golden ticket, depending on which way the light hit it. If you don't do this, Benedict said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more chilling than any scream, you aren't just letting a business fail, you're burying me all over again. Is that what you want? To be the man who found his son only to watch him get slaughtered for a signature? I looked at the document. I looked at the man who had the star-shaped scar of my boy and the desperate eyes of a fugitive. My hand hovered over the fountain pen. I need to talk to Simon Finch, I said, my voice trembling. There is no time for Finch, Benedict yelled, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and smelling of coffee. Choose Alistair. Justice or your son, because you can't have both today. The room felt like it was shrinking, the shadows of the library closing in. I was a thrifty judge, a man of evidence, but I was also a father who had just seen a miracle. And miracles, I was beginning to realize, always demanded a blood sacrifice. The rain in London didn't just fall, it dissolved the world into a blur of grey ink. I stood by the window of my Chelsea study, the 1991 DNA report sitting on my desk like a live grenade. My heart wanted to believe in the miracle, but the judge in me, the man who had spent 40 years staring into the eyes of the city's most polished liars, was screaming. The DNA is real, Alistair, but the man is a masterpiece of deception. I turned. Simon Finch stood in the doorway, his trench coat dripping onto the Persian rug. He didn't offer a greeting. Simon was a man of cold facts and hard truths, a retired Scotland Yard inspector who had been my shadow during my most dangerous trials. You found something, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Simon walked to the desk and dropped a thick, leather-bound dossier. I didn't just find something. I found an autopsy of a lie. You asked me to look into thorn sourcing and rare books. You wanted to know if your son's business was worth saving. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. Alistair, thorn sourcing doesn't exist. It's a ghost. A shell company registered in a Delaware P.O. box with 0 legitimate clients, 0 inventory, and a financial history that reads like a manual for money laundering. The room felt like it was shrinking. He said he was in debt, a bridge loan. He's in debt, all right, Simon snapped, pulling a set of high-resolution surveillance photos from the folder, but not to a bank. And certainly not for Elizabethan manuscripts. He slammed the first photo onto the mahogany desk. My breath hitched. It was a grainy image taken in the dead of night at a derelict warehouse in Canning Town, near the shadowed docks of East London. In the center of the frame stood Benedict, his face pale and contorted with a fear I hadn't seen at the tea room. But it was the man standing over him that made my blood turn to ice. He was older, wearing a camel haircoat that screamed old world wealth, his hand gripping Benedict's shoulder with a predatory familiarity. I recognized those Slavic features immediately. The cold, unblinking eyes, the jagged scar across the jaw that I had put there indirectly 35 years ago. "Nikolai Volkov," I hissed. "The nephew of Dmitry Volkov," Simon confirmed, his voice dropping to a gravelly low. "The man your father, Sir Reginald, dismantled in the 80s. The man you, as a young prosecutor, sent to Belmarsh for life." Nikolai didn't just find Benedict Alistair, he created him. I collapsed into my leather chair, the weight of the realization crushing the air from my lungs. He was taken as a weapon. They didn't kill him in Hyde Park. They raised him to be a knife aimed at my heart. "It gets worse," Simon said, sliding a digital tablet across the desk. "I didn't just follow him. I breached his system. We ran a silent ledger operation on his offshore accounts." The screen flickered with Excel spreadsheets, hundreds of rows of wire transfers, moving like a virus through banks in Cyprus, Malta, and Tirana. The numbers were staggering. £300 million laundered through shell companies since 2019. Benedict isn't an antique dealer. Alistair, he's the premier launderer for the Volkov syndicate. He's been moving their blood money across 4 continents for half a decade. Simon pointed to a final, highlighted line at the bottom of a summary sheet. £22 million, I whispered, the figure sounding like a death sentence. He didn't lose his business, Alistair. He gambled away Volkov's money in the high-stakes rooms of Macau and Atlantic City. He dipped into the syndicate's till, thinking he could win it back. He failed. Now, Nikolai Volkov has given him a choice: pay back the $22 million by October 15th, or he's a dead man. The trust fund, I realized, the horror finally crystallizing, the $165 million. He isn't here for a father. He's here for a payout to save his own skin. He's the ultimate mark, and you are the prize, Simon said, his voice ruthless. He's been researching you for 2 years. He knew about the 1992 kidnapping, he knew about the Sterling Trust, and he knew exactly how to play on your grief for Eleanor. That star-shaped scar, it might be real, but the story he gave you was a script written in blood. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair over. He cried, "Simon." He looked me in the eye and wept for the mother he lost. "You're telling me that was all? A performance?" "It was a masterpiece," Simon replied, coldly. "A 30-year revenge plot coming to fruition. Nikolai Volkov wants to destroy the Sterling legacy by having the heir you lost come back and pick your pockets clean before they put a bullet in his head." The phone on my desk buzzed, a text message. "Dad, I'm at the docks. Things are getting bad. Please tell me you've signed the papers. I don't have much time. B." I looked at the phone, then at the photos of my son, my biological son, groveling at the feet of a monster. "The deadline is October 15th, I said, my voice hardening into the tone I used when delivering a life sentence. "That's 3 days away." "What are you going to do, Alistair?" Simon asked. "If you sign, you're funding the very syndicate that stole your life. If you don't, you're signing your son's death warrant for the 2nd time." I gripped the edge of the desk, the polished wood biting into my palms. The pain was grounding. "I'm a judge, Simon. I don't negotiate with terrorists, and I don't let my blood be used as a pawn." I looked up, a cold predatory light igniting in my eyes. "Call James Miller at the National Crime Agency. Tell him we're going to play the game. Benedict wants a father. Fine. I'll give him the one thing a Sterling never lacks, a reckoning. Alistair, if this goes wrong." "It won't," I snapped, "because for the first time in 32 years, I know exactly where my son is, and I'm going to use every penny of that $165 million to burn Nikolai Volkov's world to the ground, even if I have to send my own son to a cage to do it." The fog outside seemed to thicken, swallowing the streetlights of Chelsea. The ghosts were no longer in the past. They were in the room, and they were hungry. Benedict Thorne had come for my money, but he was about to find out that a father's love was far more dangerous than a mafia's debt. The headquarters of the National Crime Agency in Westminster didn't feel like a temple of justice. It felt like a cold, concrete tomb. I sat in a windowless briefing room that smelled of ozone and stale coffee, staring at the man across the table. Senior Inspector James Miller was a man carved from granite, his eyes carrying the weariness of someone who had spent too many decades staring into the abyss of London's underworld. Beside him sat Nadia Patel, a high-ranking prosecutor with eyes like scalpels. She didn't look at me with sympathy. She looked at me like I was the final piece of a tragic puzzle. "Inspector," I began, my voice rasping, "I've seen the DNA. He is my son. Whatever you think he's done, he was a victim. He was a 3-year-old boy stolen from a park." Miller leaned forward, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his bald head. He slid a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1987 across the table. The headline hit me like a physical blow. "Prosecutor Sterling breaks Volkov syndicate." "Alistair, you were a rising star back then," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "You didn't just break them, you humiliated them. You sent Dmitry Volkov to Belmarsh for 30 years. Do you remember what he shouted as the bailiffs dragged him away?" I closed my eyes. The memory was a ghost I had tried to bury. "Your bloodline will pay. Everything you love will be taken." "We intercepted a letter Dmitry wrote from his cell in 1990, Nadia Patel added, her voice clinical and cold. "He told his nephew, Nikolai, that the time was coming. He said the Sterling bloodline must be cut. He didn't want your son dead, Alistair. Death is too quick. He wanted you to suffer for an eternity." My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the kidnapping in Hyde Park wasn't a random act of a trafficking ring," Miller growled, slamming his fist on the table. "It was a precision strike. They didn't sell Benedict to some orphanage. They kept him. They raised him inside the belly of the beast. They turned your son into the very monster you spent your life fighting." The room tilted. I thought of Benedict's tears at the Wolseley, the way he had gripped my hand and whispered about the piano music Eleanor used to play. "He told me about the music," I whispered, desperate to hold on to the miracle. He knew about the Chopin, the star scar. No stranger could know that. Nadia Patel's expression softened, but it was the kind of pity you give a dying man. "Alistair, look at the surveillance logs. They didn't just take him, they studied you. For 32 years, the Volkovs watched your family. They knew what Eleanor played. They knew about the scar because they were the ones who watched it heal through a telescopic lens before they snatched him." Miller slid a laptop toward me. "This is Benedict's real resume. He's not an antique dealer. He's the premier money launderer for the Volkov syndicate. Since 2019, he has moved over £300 million through 47 offshore accounts. He is the lungs of their operation." On the screen, a video played. It was Benedict, my Benedict, in a warehouse, cold-eyed and ruthless, standing over a man who was begging for mercy. There was no trace of the broken boy I had held in my arms just days ago. He looked at the man and nodded to a guard, who proceeded to break the victim's hands with a crowbar. Benedict didn't even flinch. He just checked his watch. "He's good at it, Alistair. He's the best," Miller said, "but he's also a gambler. He lost £22 million of Nikolai Volkov's money in Macau. Nikolai gave him a choice. Find the money by October 15th, or he's a corpse." The trust fund, I realized, the horror finally crystallizing in my gut. He didn't come back for me. He came back for $165 million. "Exactly," Nadia said. "The miracle reunion was a scripted operation. Every tear, every shaky breath, every mention of your wife, it was all designed to weaponize your grief. He waited until the trust fund was close to maturity. Then he deployed the victim narrative to bypass the legal safeguards. He wasn't looking for a father. He was looking for a payout to save his own skin. He's a soldier, Alistair, Miller added, leaning in close. He's been a criminal since he was old enough to understand the word. He doesn't love you. He doesn't even know you. To him, you are just a vault that needs a key. I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair over. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. He is still my son. You're telling me he's been a tool for revenge for 3 decades, that they stole his life just to destroy mine? Yes, Miller said, and right now, Nikolai Volkov is laughing, because the man you want to save is the man who is trying to ruin you. The kidnapping was the first act. This is the finale. If you sign those papers, you are funding the very syndicate that killed Eleanor and stole your child. You're giving them the ultimate victory. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, the physical pain grounding me. I thought of the 9991 report. The biology was a fact, but the person I thought I'd found was a phantom, a Trojan horse built by the man I'd sent to prison 35 years ago. He thinks I still believe him, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm, the voice of a judge about to pass a life sentence. He thinks he's still playing the part. He does, Miller said, a predatory glint appearing in his eyes. He thinks you are the mark. He thinks he's won. Then let's give him the performance of a lifetime, I hissed. You want him on tape. You want to flip him and destroy the Volkovs. I'll do it, but I want one thing. Miller nodded. Name it. If he survives this, I said, looking him dead in the eye, I want him in a cage where Nikolai Volkov can never touch him. He may be a monster, but he's my monster, and I will be the one to bury the Sterling legacy before I let a Volkov dance on its grave. Miller exhaled, a slow, grim smile touching his lips. Welcome to the game, Alistair. Let's go and catch a ghost. As I walked out of the NCA, the London fog seemed to tighten its grip on the city. The resurrection was a lie. The son I had mourned was truly dead, replaced by a weapon aimed at my heart. But Nikolai Volkov had forgotten one thing. A father's wrath is far more calculated than a criminal's revenge. The game was no longer about a reunion. It was about reckoning, and I was going to make sure that by the end of it, nobody was left standing. The rain in London didn't just fall, it dissolved the world into a blur of grey ink outside the windows of the NCA safe house in Southwark. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of static and cold coffee. I sat on a stool while a young technician, who couldn't have been more than 25, knelt before me, his fingers nimble and clinical as he adjusted the leather belt around my waist. "The audio transmitter is in the buckle, Mr. Sterling," he muttered. "Don't touch it. Don't fidget. It's voice-activated, high gain. We'll hear a pin drop in that hotel restaurant." I looked down at the belt. It was a masterpiece of deception, just like my son. Inspector James Miller stood by a bank of monitors, his face illuminated by the flickering blue light of surveillance feeds. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who had long ago traded his soul for a badge. "You look like you're heading to a funeral, Alistair," Miller said, his voice a low, jagged rumble. "And in a way you are. You're burying the lie of the miracle reunion and digging up the truth." "He's my son, James," I hissed, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "You're asking me to walk into that hotel and bait him into a cage. You're asking a father to be the executioner of his own blood." "I'm asking a judge to uphold the law," Miller snapped, slamming a folder onto the table. "Look at the checklist, Alistair. We need 3 things on that tape. The debt to Nikolai Volkov, and a clear admission of laundering their blood money. Without those, we have nothing. We can't flip him. We can't offer him a deal. And if we can't flip him, we can't protect him." He leaned in, his breath hot and smelling of tobacco. "You know how Nikolai Volkov works. The deadline is October 15th. That's in 48 hours. If Benedict doesn't have the £22 million by then, he won't just be dead. They'll make his ending a spectacle for the entire London underworld to witness. They'll pull him apart, Alistair." Piece by piece. The room felt like it was shrinking. The walls were closing in. lined with the ghosts of 32 years of grief. I thought of Eleanor, her fingers dancing over the piano keys, playing Chopin to soothe a crying boy with a star-shaped scar on his shoulder. She had died in a haze of pills because she couldn't live without knowing where he was. And now I have found him. But the boy I lost was a phantom. The man who returned was a weapon aimed at my heart, a tool raised by the very monsters I had spent my career trying to destroy. Why? I whispered, my voice cracking. Why didn't they just kill him in 1992? Because death is a mercy, and the Volkovs don't deal in mercy, Miller replied, his tone softening just a fraction. Dmitry Volkov wanted you to suffer for an eternity. He wanted your own son to be the one to gut your legacy. This isn't just a scam, Alistair. It's a 40-year revenge plot that has finally reached its endgame. I stood up, the weight of the transmitter belt feeling like a lead shackle. If I do this, if I get him to talk, what then? He goes to a federal cage for 35 years. He rots while I sit on a pile of money that did nothing but destroy my family. If he cooperates, we can protect him, Miller said, his eyes locking onto mine. Witness protection, a new identity, a second chance. But he has to give us Volkov first. He has to choose you over them. He's already chosen, I roared, my composure finally shattering. He chose the money. He looked me in the eye at his penthouse and lied to me about his wife, about his business, about his very soul. He doesn't want a father, James. He wants a vault key. I paced the small room, the agony of the choice tearing me in two. If I refused to help the NCA, Benedict was a dead man walking. Nikolai Volkov's enforcers were likely already tailing him, waiting for the clock to strike midnight on the 15th. But if I wore the wire, I was the one pulling the trigger on his freedom. I was the one who would have to live with the look on his face when the cuffs clicked shut. 32 years, I choked out, a sob threatening to erupt. I spent 32 years looking for him, and this is the reunion God gave me, a wire and a trap. Miller walked over and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. Rebecca, Eleanor, she never gave up. Did she? She believed he was out there until her last breath. Do you think she'd want him to die in a warehouse at the hands of a Russian mobster? Or would she want him alive, even if it's behind bars? I looked at the photograph on the desk, the one from the old house, a little boy with a melting ice lolly and a laughing mother. The innocence in that photo was gone, scorched away by a lifetime of crime and manipulation. But the blood was still mine. I have one condition, I said, my voice turning to ice, the tone of a judge delivering a final ruling. Miller nodded. Name it. You protect him, I hissed, grabbing Miller by the lapels of his coat. You keep him in a separate unit, no general population, no contact with Volkov's people, not in the van, not in the holding cell, not in the prison yard. If a single hair on his head is touched, I will use every penny of the Sterling Trust to burn your agency to the ground. Do you understand me? Miller didn't flinch. He looked at me with a grim sort of respect. You have my word, Alistair. If he talks, he stays alive. That's the deal. Then wire me up, I said, stepping back and straightening my vest. Let's finish this. The technician approached with the pen, a cheap black ballpoint. He slid it into my vest pocket, adjusting the clip. Recording starts the moment you click the top, sir. 1080p video, crystal clear audio. Just don't fidget with it. I won't, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark monitor. I looked like a father. I looked like a grieving widower. I looked like a man ready to embrace a miracle. Benedict wouldn't see the wire. He wouldn't see the NCA agents stationed at the bar or the SWAT team in the basement. He would see exactly what he wanted to see. A mark. A fool. A father blinded by love. Alistair, Miller called out as I reached for the door. Once you walk into the Savoy tomorrow morning, there's no turning back. He's going to say things that will break you. He's going to admit he never cared. Stay focused. Get the admissions. Save his life. I know, I whispered, the weight of the betrayal settling into my bones. I walked out into the London night, the cold rain soaking through my coat. I had lost my son once in a park in the sunshine. Tomorrow I would lose him again in a 5-star hotel in the rain. But this time I would be the one holding the leash. "Forgive me, Eleanor," I muttered into the fog. "I'm bringing our boy home, even if home is a prison cell." Chapter 6, The Thames Foyer at the Savoy, was an architectural masterpiece of glass and light, but to me it felt like a gilded cage. A pianist in the center of the room was playing something light, Debussy, perhaps, but the melody was drowned out by the thunderous rhythm of my own heart. Under my bespoke charcoal suit, the transmitter belt felt like a lead shackle around my waist. The left cufflink, a heavy silver heirloom, wasn't just a piece of jewelry. Its microscopic lens was broadcasting my son's downfall in high definition to a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away on the Strand. I checked my watch, 9:58 a.m. In 2 minutes, I would sit across from the boy I had lost 32 years ago and prepare to bury him forever. "Target is entering through the main lobby." James Miller's voice crackled in my earpiece, so faint it was like a ghost whispering in my skull. "Remember, Alistair, 3 admissions. The Volkov debt, the trust fund fraud, the money laundering. Don't let him walk until we have them all." I looked up. Benedict Thorne, or Benedict Sterling, as the DNA had cruelly confirmed, was walking toward the booth. He looked like a man who had been dragged through hell and back. His suit was wrinkled, his jaw was covered in a rough stubble, and his eyes were bloodshot, twitching with the manic energy of a cornered animal. He slid into the velvet booth across from me. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He simply placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table. "I need you to sign it, Dad," he rasped. His voice was jagged, stripped of the polished refinement he'd shown at the Wolseley. "Now." "There is no more time for coffee or memories. Nikolai Volkov doesn't care about reunions. He cares about his £22 million. I leaned back, my hand trembling as I reached for my cup. "You told me you were a book dealer, Benedict. You told me you were in trouble with creditors. Now you're talking about Volkov, the man who kidnapped you." Benedict laughed, a dry, hollow sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. He leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "You think I had a choice. I was 3 years old. They didn't sell me to an orphanage, Alistair. They raised me in a Belgrade basement to be a ghost. I've been laundering their blood money since I was 19. Over £300 million has passed through my hands in 5 years. I am the lungs of their organization." "And the money?" I asked, my voice a cold, judicial whisper. "I gambled it," he hissed, slamming his hand onto the table, rattling the fine china. "Macau, Atlantic City, the high-stakes rooms at the Ritz. I thought I could win enough to buy my freedom. I lost 22 million of Nikolai's cash. The deadline is 5:00 p.m. today. If that trust fund money isn't in flight by noon, they won't just kill me, they'll make sure I'm still alive when they start the fire." I looked at him, truly looked at him, through the lens of the cufflink. "So this whole reunion, the DNA test, the star-shaped scar, it was all a lie, a script to get to Sir Reginald's £165 million. Benedict's expression shifted. For a split second, a flash of genuine agony crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by a predatory calculation. "The DNA is real, Alistair. I am your son. But the miracle, that was a masterpiece. I've been researching you for 2 years. I knew about Eleanor's piano. I knew about the scar because Volkov's men were the ones who watched it happen. I came back because I needed a vault, and you were the only one with the key." "Your mother died because of you," I said. The words felt like shrapnel in my mouth. She spent 6 years searching every gutter in Europe until the grief finally poisoned her. She died holding your photograph, Benedict. And you used that grief to try and pick my pockets. "I didn't choose to be a weapon," he screamed, his voice cracking. "But I'm Nikolai's weapon now. Sign the papers, Alistair. Sign the non-judicial settlement agreement and save my life. I'll give you 70 million. We both walk away. Please. For God's sake, Dad, don't let them kill me. The confession was complete. Money laundering, trust fund fraud, the Volkov debt. I looked at the silver cufflink. I clicked the top of my ballpoint pen twice, the signal for the breach. I'm sorry, Benedict, I said, my voice as steady as a death sentence. But I already lost my son 32 years ago. You're just the ghost he left behind. Benedict's eyes went wide. He started to stand, but it was too late. The peaceful atmosphere of the Thames foyer exploded. 4 diners at the next table vaulted over their chairs, submachine guns appearing from under their jackets like magic tricks. The waiters dropped their trays, drawing service pistols. Alistair, stay down, Miller bellowed as he charged into the room. Benedict lunged for me, his fingers clawing for my throat, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated betrayal. You set me up, you bastard, I'm your blood. 2 agents tackled him mid-air, slamming him onto the marble floor with a bone-jarring thud. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the foyer like a gunshot. Benedict was pinned, his face pressed against the cold stone, screaming curses that would have made a sailor flinch. Simultaneously, the monitors in the surveillance van and the earpiece in my ear erupted with reports from the other strike teams. Alpha Team, breach at Port of London, Miller's radio crackled. On the remote feed, a tactical team smashed through a warehouse door in West Ham. Nikolai Volkov was caught in the middle of a transaction, surrounded by £12 million in cash and crates of illegal hardware. He reached for a sidearm, but a taser lead caught him in the chest, dropping him like a sack of stones. Beta Team, intercept at Heathrow. At Terminal 5, 3 couriers carrying duffel bags packed with £8 million were surrounded at the boarding gate. They didn't even have time to shout before they were face down on the carpet in zip ties. Gamma Team, penthouse secured. In the luxury flat in London, Benedict's wife was already handing over the offshore ledgers and encrypted drives to federal agents. The entire Volkov empire was collapsing in a matter of seconds, triggered by the words of a man who thought he was the hunter. The Savoy was silent now, save for the heavy breathing of the agents and the distant, haunting notes of the piano, which had never stopped playing. Benedict was hauled to his feet. He looked at me, and for a heartbeat I saw the 3-year-old boy again, terrified and lost, but then his eyes hardened into twin shards of ice. I hope you enjoy your money, Alistair, he spat, blood dripping from his lip, because you just traded your only son for a cage. I watched them lead him out through the revolving doors. The London fog swallowed him whole, just as it had in 1992. I sat back down in the booth, the 99-91 report still sitting on the table. I had saved his life, but I had destroyed his soul. James Miller walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Alistair. You did the right thing. I didn't answer. I just looked at the empty seat across from me and wondered if a father could ever truly win a war against his own blood. The air in the Old Bailey's courtroom number 4 was cold, a biting, sterile chill that no amount of mahogany paneling could warm. I sat in the 3rd row, my fingers digging into the worn velvet of the pew until my knuckles turned white. Beside me, Inspector James Miller sat like a statue, his presence a silent reminder that justice was a machine, and today it was about to grind my only son into dust. At exactly 900 a.m., the side door groaned open. The rhythmic, sickening clink of metal on stone echoed through the silent chamber. Benedict Thorne, my Benedict, was led in. He was wearing a drab, oversized prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed to a waist chain, his ankles shackled. He had lost a terrifying amount of weight. His cheekbones looked like razor blades beneath his skin, and his eyes were hollowed out, as if the man I had met at the Wolseley had been hollowed out and replaced with a ghost. He didn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor as the prosecutor, Nadia Patel, stood up. Her voice was a scalpel, peeling back the layers of our tragedy for the court to see. "Your Honor," she began, her voice echoing with clinical ruthlessness. "The defendant facilitated the movement of £300 million in illicit funds for the Volkov syndicate. He built a life on the bones of victims, and when his own greed led to a £22 million debt, he turned to the ultimate prey, his own father. He weaponized 32 years of a father's grief, using a star-shaped scar and a mother's memory to steal £165 million. Every word was a hammer blow. I looked at the back of Benedict's head and saw not a master criminal, but the 3-year-old boy who had vanished in a blur of blue coat and tears in Hyde Park. Then, the Judge Catherine Brennan looked down at him. "Does the defendant wish to speak?" Benedict stood slowly, the chains rattling with a violent, jarring cacophony. He turned his head just enough to catch my eye. For a second, the mask of the hardened money launderer vanished. "I was 3 years old when I was taken," he said, his voice cracking like dry timber. "I don't remember the house on Spruce Street. I don't remember the piano. I only remember the van. I only remember being told I was merchandise." He took a shuddering breath. "I knew what I was doing when I lied to you, Alistair. I knew I was gutting the only person who ever looked for me. I made my choice, and I accept the cage it bought me." The judge didn't flinch. "Benedict Sterling, also known as Benedict Thorne, I sentence you to 32 years in federal prison with eligibility for parole after 25 years. Remand him immediately." The gavel sounded like a bone breaking. The marshals grabbed his arms. As they hauled him toward the door, he looked back at me one last time, his lips trembling. He mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." I watched the doors swing shut. He was gone. I had saved his life from Nikolai Volkov's assassins, but I had handed him to the cold, slow death of a concrete cell. 5 months later, the fog of London had turned to a biting winter. I stood outside a new office on Piccadilly, looking at the gold lettering on the glass door, the Elinor Sterling Nation. The NCA had finally released the trust fund, £165 million. My father, Sir Reginald, had built it to protect his bloodline, but that bloodline was now behind bars. I didn't want the money. It felt like a mountain of silver built on top of my wife's grave. I allocated £160 million to the foundation. Its mission was simple: locate missing children and dismantle the human trafficking networks that turn sons into monsters. I hired the best investigators, former NCA, former yardmen, who wouldn't stop until they found the truth. It was the only way to honor Eleanor. Losing Benedict had killed her. I would spend the rest of my life making sure it didn't kill anyone else. But there was £5 million I kept in a separate, secret account, a bridge for a man who wouldn't be free for a quarter of a century. On a Saturday in December, I drove to the high-security prison. The visiting room smelled of industrial disinfectant and despair. I sat behind the bulletproof glass, my heart hammering against my ribs as a guard led Benedict in. We picked up the telephone receivers at the same time. "You didn't have to come, Alistair," he said, his voice sounding small, stripped of all its former arrogance. "I'm your father, Benedict. I've spent 32 years looking for you. I'm not going to stop now just because there's a wall between us." He pressed his palm against the glass, a desperate, futile gesture to reach through the barrier. "Do you hate me? After everything, the lies, the debt, the Volkovs, do you hate what I became?" I looked at his hand, then at his face, the face of the boy Eleanor had loved more than life itself. "I'm angry, Benedict." "I'm devastated," I said, my voice steady despite the tears blurring my vision. "But I don't hate you. I hate the monsters who stole your soul. And I'm going to spend the next 25 years helping you find it again." We sat in silence for a long time after Benedict crying quietly, and me watching him and trying to reconcile every version of the person I'd lost and found and lost again. At 3:00 p.m., a guard tapped Benedict on the shoulder and told him time was up, and he stood slowly and looked at me through the glass. "Will you come back?" I thought about the foundation and the £5 million I'd set aside in a separate trust account with Benedict's name on it. Money he wouldn't know about until he was eligible for parole, and 25 years' money that would be waiting if he wanted to start over. I thought about Rebecca and the 35 years I'd spent looking for our son, and the fact that I'd finally found him in the worst possible way. "I don't know," I said, "but maybe." I walked out of the prison and drove back to London through the winter afternoon. And by the time I reached the city limits, I'd made a decision. I'd lost Benedict twice, once to the monsters who took him in 1992, and once to the man he'd become under their influence. But maybe, just maybe, I could help him find his way back. It would take 25 years, and there were no guarantees. But I'd already spent 36 years searching for him. What was another quarter century if it meant giving my son a second chance at the life that had been stolen from both of us? My story is a valuable lesson about the struggle between family and justice. Don't let past pain and loss blind you to the warning signs in the present. Love can make us weak, but true strength lies in daring to face the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Forgiveness doesn't mean erasing mistakes, but finding a way to redeem what has been lost in the most righteous way. Thank you for following this tragic yet hopeful journey to the very end. Stories of resilience and justice like this always need your support to spread positive values. Subscribe to the channel today so you don't miss the next episodes, and help us build a community that shares and understands the hidden aspects of life. Your interaction is the motivation for these stories to continue living.
That girl is a runner. She was born to get away. Hear that two-tone humming, headed out to the highway.